Hello and welcome to Al Jazeera's Washington, D.C. broadcast center, right here in the heart of the United States Capitol. Right now, in this part of the world, just a few blocks from this very studio, decisions continue to be made that are reverberating not just across the Middle East, but across the globe. And we've got one job here, that is to bring you clarity, to bring you context and analysis as those decisions are made, how they impact you and what they mean. I'll have more later in the show, but to get things going, here's our chief US correspondent, Alan Fisher.
Thanks, Phil. We'll look at the big decisions and issues with our team who are at key locations across the country. The topic dominating conversations here: will President Trump, the man who campaigned against what he called stupid foreign wars, send American troops into battle in Iran? Mike Hanna is where that decision will be made, at the White House. Kristen Saloomey is in America's financial capital, New York, and Patty Culhane joins us live from Capitol Hill. The questions over the scope, scale and purpose of the war have exposed divisions that have deep implications for American politics on both sides of the aisle, extending far beyond the traditional doves and hawks. Extensive use of America's high-tech weaponry is costing a fortune, more than $11 billion in the first week. And it has caused major disruption to global transport and the energy sector. It has many Americans questioning an entanglement that is costly and has the potential to pull the administration and the entire nation deeper and deeper into a conflict where US soldiers have to go on the ground. Let's go first to our correspondent, Mike Hanna. He is at the White House. Mike, there's a lot of noise around this. What are the chances of President Trump is ready to send the men and women of the US military into fight on the ground in Iran?
Well, there has been a lot of speculation about it, given the fact that President Trump is intent, it would appear, on ending this conflict on a victorious note. And in a way, if he does want to get one of his stated aims of a change in government, it would be necessary perhaps to put boots on the ground. But neither he nor his defense secretary will be drawn on the subject. The defense secretary was asked the question directly. He said, no, this is not something to be discussed. It is an operational matter. President Trump has said exactly the same when asked, insisting that the deployment of troops on the ground into the theater of war would be an operational matter. He is not going to discuss it. But certainly politically for President Trump, it would be deeply damaging given how unpopular this war is among a substantial portion of the American public. Putting soldiers into the theater of war, onto the ground, would have irrevocable political consequences for the US president.
Now, Kristen Saloomey is live for us in New York. Kristen, we're already seeing huge volatility in the oil markets. That has an impact on so many parts of the US economy. That must leave investors divided on the war. And what comes next?
Yes, well, oil prices are again climbing, but the war is weighing on markets more generally, and we're seeing them in negative territory for the second day in a row. Higher oil prices are good for oil producers, and the United States is the largest oil producer in the world, but they also mean higher prices for consumers at the gas pump and for goods and services as they are transported across the world. So one of the main issues Donald Trump was elected on was reducing prices, reducing inflation. And at this point, none of his efforts to increase oil production have had an impact on oil prices or have stopped them from rising. Attacks in the Straits of the Hormuz are continuing. Tanker traffic remains at a standstill. And we're seeing financial advisors adjust their economic outlooks for the year, predicting that inflation is much more likely now than they thought it was before the war started. And so that means that while the president's supporters right now are mostly sticking with him on Iran, the longer this continues, the more that support is at risk and the more the risk to the economy continues.
Let's go to Patty Culhane, who's on Capitol Hill. Patty, we expect splits on Capitol Hill, but there are even divides within the parties about how the US handles this next of sending troops into combat in the Middle East again? What does that actually look like on the Hill?
Well, really, truly, there hasn't been a lot of talk up here on the Hill from members of Congress about sending ground troops in. And we've heard from maybe one Democratic senator who warned that it was a possibility. And I want to remind you that last week when I was up here on the Hill talking to Secretary of State Marco Rubio in a press briefing, he did say and admitted the U.S. is not positioned to be able to strike Iran with ground forces. That said, Republican members of Congress have largely been sticking with President Donald Trump. They back Iran. Democrats back the Iran war, even though they don't say war. Democrats completely opposed to it. So that said, that could change if ground forces are introduced. One poll said 74% of Americans said they oppose the use of ground forces, and that even applies to Republicans who in large part support this action. In one poll, 52% said they would oppose sending ground troops in. Only 37% would approve.
Thank you, Mike. At the White House, Kristen in New York, and Patty on Capitol Hill. Deploying American troops onto Iranian soil is undoubtedly the single most divisive issue of the war so far. The White House has said it's going to happen, hasn't said it's going to happen, but hasn't ruled it out either. With the sounds and the pain of drawn-out conflicts like Iran and Afghanistan echoing across the country, the prospect of another so-called forever war is causing debate in all corners of America. Heidi Jo Castro has more.
So far, U.S. firepower against Iran has come from the seas and the skies. But a whole new phase of war could open if U.S. ground forces enter Iran.
Could there be? Possible, for very good reason.
Following classified briefings, Democrats in Congress say they believe that's where the war is heading.
We seem to be on a path toward deploying American troops on the ground in Iran to accomplish any of the potential objectives here.
What those objectives are remain unclear. Military experts say it would take many thousands of U.S. forces to wage ground battle against the IRGC, while a more targeted mission, like an attempt to assassinate Iran's new supreme leader like his father before him, would require fewer special ops forces. Former Pentagon spokesman and war veteran David Lapan says the lack of clarity to the U.S.'s military goals only further endangers troops.
Causes questions in the minds of U.S. forces is about what exactly are they attempting to achieve.
And do those questions, can they lead to increased risk then?
They can, because the thing is that you always want to have folks that are completely focused on the mission and not distracted.
The first American casualties of the war, killed in retaliatory strikes on U.S. bases, have already returned home. Memorials to American soldiers killed in action dot communities across the country, and some, like this one, have empty spaces for more names to be added, the results of future conflicts. This is the most poignant reason why 3 out of 4 Americans oppose sending U.S. ground troops to Iran. Even some prominent voices in Trump's MAGA base have voiced disappointment.
Well, it just seems so insane based on what he ran on. I mean, this is why a lot of people feel betrayed, right?
While the U.S. has a history of deploying a large force to overwhelm enemies, engagements in the Trump era have favored the use of special forces. Whatever route the U.S. president now chooses against Iran would be full of risks in a conflict unleashed with no clear end. Heidi Jo Castro, Al Jazeera, Washington.
Well, Donald Trump says he's nowhere near ordering a US ground invasion in Iran. Reportedly, privately, he's expressed interest in deployments. And we know the US military has been drawing up plans if the president orders the go. It has been a sticking point for the media here in the United States. Here's Phil Lavelle again with more.
This issue is not just dividing the electorate, it's also dividing those within Donald Trump's own party and apparently so within his own cabinet. Let's take a look at how this is being reported in the US Mirror. It says insiders say Secretary of State Marco Rubio and US Secretary of War Pete Hegseth are at odds. And that's putting it mildly, because other sources have said, speaking to Middle East Eye, 3 former US officials with knowledge of the situation said that Rubio and Hegseth were, quote, at each other's throats over the issue. It goes on to add, Hegseth supports the proposal, while Rubio desperately doesn't want to drag the US into a protracted war in the Middle East. Remember, Donald Trump fought a presidential election campaign on there being no more protracted wars in the Middle East. Let's move on to the New Republic then. This concentrates on the words of one Democratic senator, that is Richard Blumenthal. It says, Democratic senator warns US is on path to ground invasion of Iran. He's inside a lot of these closed-door meetings, so he's talking about these. Apparently, he says, I am most concerned about the threat to American lives of potentially deploying our sons and daughters on the ground in Iran. And it goes on to add more. I emerged from this briefing as dissatisfied and angry, frankly, as I have from any past briefing in my 15 years in the Senate. Right, let's move on to the other side of the political spectrum. This is Republican South Carolina Senator Lindsey Graham. He is obviously a big golfing buddy of Donald Trump. He often appears on conservative media to defend the president and his policies. And he was talking on Fox News about this very possibility of a troop deployment.
I go back to South Carolina. I'm asking them to send their sons and daughters over to the Mideast.
Now, that was picked up on by the Daily Beast. It says MAGA rips into Graham's wish to send American sons and daughters to war. And it goes further. It says not everyone in the president's base is hell-bent on sending American troops to fight in Iran. A little bit further, they say the president's coalition is brutally dragging bloodthirsty Senator Lindsey Graham for saying he will ask his constituents to send their sons and daughters to potentially die in Iran. Also throws a little bit of shade his way, saying Graham, 70, has never been married and has no children. We're going to stick with that side of the political spectrum because this is Megyn Kelly. If you don't know her, she used to be a Fox News host. She's now a very prominent conservative podcaster, and she was not happy about any potential troop deployment or what Lindsey Graham had to say.
I already did 20 years of that. I did 20 years of marching us blindly into war and cheerleading it and not being the one to carry the consequences. But I've interviewed enough soldiers missing legs and soldiers who almost killed themselves due to PTSD, who don't see any value in what they did over there, especially after we gave it up under Joe Biden, that I know now more caution is needed.
So the official line from the White House is there is no official line. The president has been asked about this multiple times. You can see the administration has tried to steer the conversation away. But the Secretary of Defense, or the Secretary of War, depending on what you call him, says that he doesn't want to give Iran any indication of what may be coming. He wants to keep Iran guessing.
Well, joining us now to discuss the next steps for the White House is former Republican Congressman Tom Davis and also Laurie A. Watkins, who was a policy advisor to President Barack Obama. Congressman, you were well known for bipartisanship, getting both sides to work together. Would you have to get both sides of the Republican movement to work together to get a common theme through all of this?
Well, I don't think this is a political decision. I think when presidents sit there as the chief executive, commander-in-chief, you look at what's good for the country at that time. And I think he just sees Iran as an existential threat to this country. We tried once before of staying out of it, and we got bombed on 9/11. And so I think he's being proactive in doing what he feels as commander-in-chief is and let the politics lay where they may. Now, that's not to say politics don't have a role in this downstream. I've been through, remember, I was in the Army during Vietnam. I served in the Nixon administration, saw the Iraq War. Americans have very low tolerance for this, and I think the Iranians understand that. But I think the president did what he thought he needed to do at this point with Iran.
Laurie, as well as working in the White House, you also worked at the Pentagon. If you were a Republican, what would you advise Donald Trump to do now? Troops on the ground?
Absolutely not, even though that's the posture that we are leading to, the second and third order of effects that we are seeing happen. I don't know how we, based on what the president continues to say that his goal is, that we don't send troops on the ground. But I would like to start by saying and acknowledging the 7 U.S. service members whose lives have already been lost, as well as 140 U.S. service members have been severely injured in this conflict already, and we're only into week 2.
What we have seen is, of course, the numbers have been going up over the last couple of days as they announced the number of injuries. No person embodies the Republican political divide on this issue more than Vice President J.D. Vance. The former Marine has been a clear voice for the America First doctrine. He was fiercely against the idea of foreign U.S. military intervention. And as John Hendren now reports, it's left him struggling to articulate President Donald Trump's strategy or the rationale for attacking Iran?
The Iran war has set off an intellectual battle within the Republican Party and a conflict for one of its leading voices. It pits J.D. Vance.
Our interest, I think, very much is in not going to war with Iran, right?
Against J.D. Vance.
We're not at war with Iran. We're at war with Iran's nuclear program.
2 years have passed between those two statements. In that time, the vice president has gone on something of an ideological journey. Vance rose to political prominence as an Iraq War veteran who'd become an anti-interventionist and critic of the wars in Iraq and Afghanistan. In the 2024 election campaign, as candidate Donald Trump's running mate, then Senator Vance argued that Trump would not send Americans to fight wars overseas.
We're going to stop sending our young people to faraway lands. We are not the policemen of the world.
That was then. This is now, during President Donald Trump's war.
He's not going to let his country go to war unless there's a clearly defined objective. He's defined that objective as Iran cannot have a nuclear weapon and has to commit long-term to never trying to rebuild their nuclear capability. It's pretty clear. It's pretty simple.
Vance now argues that this time the U.S. would avoid the kind of quagmires that extended the Middle East wars of the past.
Have you said thank you once?
He opposed U.S. involvement in the war in Ukraine.
We ought to focus on our own security, not subsidize European welfare. They can take care of themselves.
Supporting President Trump's war in Iran could come at a political cost.
As a likely presidential candidate in 2028, Vance faces the challenge of holding together the coalition that propelled Republicans to victory in 2024. His defense of the war could complicate his political future in a party that remains divided over foreign intervention.
Vance and the Trump administration are already contending with the ire of conservative isolationists who oppose the war.
Nothing whatsoever to do with us. This is Israel's war.
That's a contention the Trump administration faces today, and if he becomes the party's next standard bearer, one that Vance might well confront in 2028. John Hendren, Al Jazeera, Washington.
Let's go back to our guests, Tom Davis and Laurie Watkins. Laurie, J.D. Vance has been conspicuous by his absence here. He's not out selling the war. Do you think that's something that Donald Trump should be concerned about?
Yes, absolutely. Your vice president is supposed to support what the president does and be actually out there talking to the American public. And we're not seeing that at all. And in my opinion, Donald Trump is setting him up as a 2028 candidate for absolute failure. He can't run away from this. They are in this war together. He can flip-flop around from his positions and what helped him get elected, but everyone sees through this. And earlier your piece said that Hegseth and Rubio, for example, are at each other's throat. I just want to point out that that is another signal that this was not a thought-out and well-planned endeavor. When you have the secretaries of the most important departments that are not even on the same page, and this is being aired out for public opinion to, affect these poll numbers that we're seeing, it's a disaster. And at the American public's expense, and of course our U.S. service members and those who perform duties in intelligence.
Tom Davis, if you sign up, Donald Trump says there's philosophical differences on the war with his vice president. He's got to go along, doesn't he? Because if you sign up to be vice president, there's a collective responsibility, isn't there?
You've got no choice. But I just point out that when President Obama did his nuclear treaty with Iran, the Senate majority, the Democratic leader of the Senate, voted against that treaty. So having division within a party is not uncommon in these things. You have one commander-in-chief, you have a lot of counter pressures, and you've got to make the decision that you think is best for the country. I think politics clearly didn't drive this decision. The convenient thing is to stay out of this and let the good times roll. But I think the president saw a necessity going in now while Iran was weakened and go in and try to finish the job.
Does this hurt J.D. Vance in the long term? Sorry, Laurie, you want to say something.
I was going to say, let's not kid ourselves here. Donald Trump is all about politics. He cares. That's all he cares about is public opinion, his ego, how he polls, the stock market and how it's doing. So I don't know how you don't make this political when he has made it political. And he is losing. The Republican Party is losing. And we're going to see the House completely flip in November. And maybe we're even going to see the Senate do the same.
Tom, you're nodding along there. Are you in agreement here?
We were talking about it out there.
Yeah, well, look, I mean, how many presidents always lose seats in midterm elections? All but 3 times in American history, they've lost the House. So I think you got to put this into an historical perspective. But presidents have a higher duty than just getting elected and getting their members elected, and that's doing what they think is right for the country. I think that's what drove the president in this case.
But if you make yourself the guy who hasn't started any foreign wars in the first term, and then you launch 3 attacks on Iran, on Venezuela, and then a war on Iran, that's not a good look, is it?
Well, it depends how they turn out. I mean, if you're in and out, I don't see any damage at all on the Venezuela thing. I think the American public supports that, even though Democrats were very quick to critique it at the time. Anytime Donald Trump says yes, they say no. I think this has to play out. But there's a lot of political pressure domestically on the president, but there's also geopolitical pressure in the Middle East that are going to go after, make him drive his decision.
We could go on,
yes,
but we're going to have to draw a line under it there. Thanks very much indeed for you both, Laurie Watkins and Tom Davis. Thank you very much indeed. So any discussion about conducting a war, never mind an escalating one, is going to be not just a polarising issue among politicians, but also the public. So how has that fight been playing out on social media? Here's Alex Baird with more.
That closed-door war briefing at the Capitol has been fuel for Democratic senators online. Chris Murphy was there and immediately took to X, saying Trump's war plans are incoherent and incomplete. Democrat Senator Richard Blumenthal was also in the room, and he's gone viral with this.
I am more fearful than ever after this briefing that we may be putting boots on the ground.
That question of boots on the ground has been fuel to the online fire, even from Republicans. House Foreign Affairs Committee Chair Brian Mast asserting that those boots must be those of the Iranian people. Republican and former Congresswoman Marjorie Taylor Greene came out swinging against White House Press Sec Caroline Leavitt, who wouldn't rule out a military draft, saying, in all caps, no boots on the ground. She took to X again, coming for Republican Senator Lindsey Graham after this message to South Carolina voters. Taylor Greene's take, send Senator Graham to the front lines instead.
That's all from me, Alan Fisher, in Washington, D.C., and from the team here from the nation's capital. We'll keep following the decisions that shape America and influence the world.